could have been my error because I could have missed it. Always possible in
I
an
was
electronic environment.
I was using Internet Hospital, or the hospital's internet,
Ah,
and it really sucked.
So do you not have some people's grades on Moodle or?
some people haven't turned, I was going to talk about grades a little later, but
Okay.
here we are. There are some people that don't seem to have turned in anything. None of them are in this room because you're showing up.
Not one single thing.
Yeah, like not one single thing.
I think I've turned.
But hey, like I said, none of them are in this room, so
There's that.
I ain't tripping.
That's a dumb one. Why would you do that?
I know, it's their money, or maybe it ain't their money. What can I say?
I think
It's
the
their
only thing I have
education.
left is the
Their
research
education.
paper.
All right, so let's roll. So definitely if you don't, I am caught up. So if you're not seeing your thing, just email me and let me know and resend whatever you see is missing.
You mean the grade on Moodle?
Yeah,
Okay, so it should be on Moodle.
should be on Moodle by now. I
Okay.
was up to 1 doing them.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. So this week it's assessment and diagnosis, which if you're working in a stand-up treatment agency, they have their ways of doing it that follow the American Society of Addiction Medicine as well as DSM. But I like to unpack that because obviously, you know, as you've seen me over the last 9 weeks, you know that my focus is a little beyond that. Right? So assessment, a judgment about something based on an understanding of the situation. Diagnosis, the identifying of an illness or disorder in the patient through interview, physical exam, medical tests, and other procedures. The identifying of the nature or cause of something, for especially a problem or a fault. A decision or conclusion reached by medical or other diagnosis. So 3 different senses of diagnosis. If I was doing my thinking cap, so if we just do assessment. So a judgment based on an understanding of situation. You have to know not only what they are telling you, but the part of the story they're not telling you, but inferred by the evidence in the story. Here's an example, right? Because that's general. I get referrals from the counseling department because I'm part of the counseling department. Whenever I read that a person has memory gaps, that's trauma. If they also, because there's no real reason, if there is no organic brain damage, and what I mean by organic brain damage, the brain is an organ. If it's functioning properly, if there's no physical damage, you should be able to remember parts of your life. Now, if you can't remember parts of your life, there's a reason for that. Okay, so if I see memory gaps and then history of drug abuse, okay, that could be it. But then if I see PTSD, then I know that in this particular person's case, okay, they were essentially tortured. And domestic violence.
So how far does a person, like, how far?
But they didn't, notice they didn't say I was tortured and, you know, domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't say that, right? So, but certain things that they say should trigger in you, what's the story behind that story? Right? So if you understand that, yeah, they're talking about PTSD, memory loss, that they're going to be triggered by certain things. Right. I'm kind of getting into this series when I break away from my sci-fi thing, True Detective.
My brother is obsessed with that show.
Well, I mean, it's a trip because with this last episode, basically,
How many seasons are there?
this is the first one. We just started, right? So, you know, these detectives that are basically following the serial killers and some of it involving sexual abuse of children, et cetera, et cetera. The children are basically describing this story where I think it was a dream, because I can't really open my eyes, but when I do, I see these animal masks, so it must be a dream. And they're doing things to me, et cetera, et cetera. So, right, these kids have been drugged, and they're getting brownouts. That's different from blackout. Okay, blackout is total amnesia, not remembering, because your brain isn't processing memory in real time. But sometimes in those states, a little thing will leak through.
That's a brownout.
That's a brownout. You're getting pieces of it, like it's a dream. Just like recalling a dream. Now, recalling dreams isn't necessarily traumatic, but unless you're skilled at lucid dreaming, you're not necessarily going to remember details. It'll sort of fade over time. Right? So, you have to know not only what they're telling you, but the part of what they're not telling you. Mainly because they might not actually have the language to. Okay, so you have to put it in context. Like I said with, for example, Project Imani, the Head Start, program where the kid is saying, when Daddy uses the brown powder, it's okay, but when he uses the white powder, I have to run and hide. And it's the difference between the white powder is meth and the brown powder is heroin. And so kid is getting sexually abused on meth, but not on heroin. Now, a 4-year-old's not going to tell you, Daddy uses meth and sexually abuses me. All they can see is what they're reporting. They're telling you a story. So you have to gain that knowledge by having it beforehand, and so that's part of the assessment. So understand what I'm training you to do. Okay? They will tell you a story. They are coming to you for help, but they might be leaving out some of the details. And not necessarily because they're hiding something, but that's also a possibility too. When pearls of wisdom. So the oyster makes pearls to basically use their mucus to cover up sand that's irritating their soft flesh. So they coat it with mucus, the mucus hardens, and that's what a pearl is. So a pearl comes out of pain. Okay, so when Yeshua was talking about don't cast your pearl before swine, basically what he's saying is don't trust anybody that can't see your pain or that causes more pain. If you can reveal your pain to them and they don't mess it up or make it worse, you can trust them. But don't be casting your pearls of wisdom before people that don't get it or understand it. Or swine, because swine are just, considered, they just eat and copulate and live in their own filth. So there are people that live like that too. So, assessment. Inferred by the evidence in the story. Okay? What's the story behind the story? And you definitely, pretty much every biopsych that I read and the ones that I've returned here indicated that you have that skill. So that's good. So, normal. So, I noticed that some people wrote this within their biopsych too. So, experimental. So, what's normal? The experimental use is the first or second time after you use a drug. After that, the experiment is over. Gateway drugs, right? So, this is an old concept, and to the degree that it has validity, it's basically just describing a story behind the story. So, alcohol. The idea behind alcohol, and this is the story behind the story, an external substance changes consciousness. Tobacco. Tobacco conditions the lungs for smoking. So in American society, the age-controlled drugs, that is alcohol and tobacco, are usually the first ones people do. Because they're around. They're in the house. So, alcohol teaches you that an external substance changes consciousness. Tobacco conditions the lungs for smoking so that by the time you smoke marijuana, a smoked external substances changes your consciousness, and usually this is the first foray into the underground illegal drug territory or underground economy. This is not to say heroin dealers also sell pot, though that may be true. Generally it ain't. But you get connected to an underground economy. Legalization is not going to change that all that much because of the roots of where the economy came from. Now, of course, there could be other gateway drugs like pharmaceuticals if people are treated for ADHD or something like that. Or given Prozac or any number of things. External substances change my mood. So our culture has been, mainstream culture has basically taught us to rely on pills, not skills. All right, so normal, first use, average age of initiation, that is the first time you use on your own, not holidays, etc.
What do you mean holidays?
Huh?
What do you mean not holidays?
Well, if you grew up in a family like mine, or what is typically portrayed as normal on television,
Like drinking.
Thanksgiving, you're allowed a sip of wine, Super Bowl, Christmas dinner, right? Super wine, you know, if you're supervised by your adults, etc., right? So I'm not talking about that because people often cite that. No, the first time you used on your own, right? So the prevention data defined that as between 10 and 14 years old. In Oregon, the current age of initiation is 10. The average is 10 years old. It's like 5th grade. Okay? So this is assuming, so normal's in quotes because this assumes society's norm for non-use, non-addiction without us understanding what addiction is. And do you think society is normed that way, really? No. So normal is addictive from our point of view.
Well, they start out.
For civilians, that's not the case. They don't think about that. For our purposes, normal is addictive. We're trying to change that, but. All right, now if they started using before 10, and this is how you can read it, and I found this to be pretty reliable. If they started before age 10, this is a problem. Usually indicates parents are using, particularly if the kid uses between 5 and 10. You know, you go from blowing joint smoke into the cat's face into your kids. Ha ha ha. Kid actually accidentally ingests a brownie or whatever. It has happened, yeah.
When I was really young, both my parents are not, like, they rarely drink, and they gave me like a cup of beer to just taste it, to like kind of like make it like kind of normal, like to not abuse alcohol. Would that mean that I like have I'm predisposed to a problem with alcohol? I wouldn't say so.
Well, did it work?
Yeah, I've never viewed alcohol as like something like, because of that I haven't like abused it as much.
Okay. All right. That can work. you're saying in your case it did. So basically that's taking away the forbidden fruit, the taboo, that's taking the charge off of it, so it becomes no big deal. Nothing to be sought out, then also nothing to be avoided once you're of age.
And what about marijuana or anything else in that?
Well, again, this is one of those things where, you know, who are you going to follow? So if we're following the science, developmentally the genome was not it was designed to work without psychoactive substances. So there are issues of development. It is affecting development.
I personally didn't like it. It tasted awful.
Yeah. You know, just like as a kid, you don't like black coffee either. It's an acquired taste. Alcohol is an acquired taste. Yucky. Why do you even want that? Right? So, it also sometimes can indicate some type of abuse or neglect, which may be in the kid or the client self-medicated to relieve the abuse-related trauma. Now again, this depends on, you know, the family structure, because like as you indicated, you know, basically, you know, they're trying to destigmatize the use of alcohol, but neither are they handing you beers as a kid either.
And some parents, they think, well, you know, if I'd rather see them come home and use alcohol at home or get their marijuana from their parents or their whatever drugs from their parents so they're not getting it on the street.
Yeah, right. The data would tend to indicate that's not a great practice.
Yeah.
But, you know, there are people who get away with it, as, you know, as evidenced by, you know, some of the people that we deal with. Sometimes there's no harm, no foul. Sometimes that was totally the wrong move.
I think it still depends on the chemistry of the person that you're giving the drug to, right?
Yeah.
For that,
Go ahead.
I just want to say that, like, because I had some kids I grew up with that their parents did that, and, you know, they drank and smoked a lot more with their parents giving it to them
Yeah.
than me and my friends did, who had to go talk somebody into buying us some beer or something, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, so I just thought it was kind of silly.
Right.
But, I mean, kids can't get it that often unless, you know, they're hanging out with their own people anyway, so I just think it's kind of silly.
Yeah, I mean, I sit on the Prevention Coalition, and also part of, you know, your midterm was basically looking at, you know, so 0.21 goes with the 100-pound girl, okay? Now, they shoulder tapped to get her 3 beers and a shot of vodka out of a gallon, and that put her in the hospital. Fortunately, she lived. Okay? But remember, we're talking about a context in which we're not in a cultural situation that does not promote addiction. It does promote addiction. So when you hear people talking about responsible drinking, what does that mean? And who's promoting that concept? Right? The alcohol industry is working off of a model about profitability, which is essentially they need you using addictively before you're 15 in order for them to stay profitable. Because remember, they're losing a 757 worth of people a day. Every day. So 150,000 people a year for alcohol alone. Just from drug effect, and that isn't even counting, you know, accidents and murders and all that other kind of stuff. So that has to be replaced. So they have to start you young. So that can often be the challenge with, you know, parents letting, you know, kids do that. But then you can also have productive individuals coming out of that as well. All right, so you might be, in your assessment process, the first person to identify the normal behavior in the family of origin as abusive. So don't be surprised if you get pushback from the client on that. You might get agreement. But, you know, it's kind of hard to think of your parents who you love as abusing you when they just partied with you. Might be difficult to see that as abuse. Okay, so normal is what happens on a regular, predictable basis. So this has changed so much now we keep referring to the new normal. Normal used to be considered being raised by a two-parent nuclear family. Now, with more people being raised by the system's not really a good parent. And I'd say only marginally better than abusive parents, but marginally. All right? So you also have people who weren't parented raising kids the way the cat learned to swim. That, you know, all cats actually do know how to swim, but they don't like it. So some cats like to swim, but they're top predators. But people who are parenting without they don't go to relationship school, they don't get a parenting license. How do we do this?
Well, they learn, if their parents are bad, they learn to either be like them or not be like them,
Yeah, but not necessarily what to do.
Right.
So, for example, emotional equations, anger, denied expression, A minus E in parentheses, multiplied some time equals depression, right? Anger, being abused and denied the ability to protest, report, or be protected by my abuser, and the number of times I was abused that I can remember if I actually try to count them, but I can't or don't want to remember, but let's say at least 50 times that I can remember. It's like an actual client. Right, because why would I make something up unless it was real? Right, so this is the piece in the assessment about they're not going to remember everything, and they're only going to remember some of the high points, and means the worst parts, but maybe not the worst of the worst. So 50 times anger, denied expression, multiply 50 times that I can remember, and that could be depression. Depression's painful. Pain must be relieved, and in this case, relief was multiple suicide attempts, self-medication to the point of blackout, which she characterized as attempted suicide by overdose. So the opposite then is basically expression, which started with therapy and assessment and basically naming what was going on. So sometimes I'm depressed is code for I'm angry. And I'm angry because I was hurt. And I was hurt by this person or this system or etc. So sometimes the expression can be speaking it, it can be writing it in a journal, it could be art, a number of things. Diagnosis. Di means to, gnosis means to know. So, diagnosis is knowledge by the two parties involved in the healing transaction, what is necessary for that healing transaction to occur. So not just by one person, the professional, but both. As I said before, I think last week and the week before, to the client, they aren't symptoms. It's their life. It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you that's producing a symptom described by DSM. But the symptom and the diagnosis doesn't necessarily give the way out. Right? We're not qualified to diagnose, but we are required to know what the diagnosis means and being able to explain to the client what it means so that the client can make cognitive, that is thought adjustments, emotional adjustments, and behavioral changes in the light of the diagnosis. Like an action step beside taking a pill. Okay? So, do you understand what the diagnosis means? That's the question. I'm not asking you, do you understand? But I could be. You understand what the diagnosis means? Does the client know what it means? Can you explain that to them?
I think that's a huge issue.
It is. It's major. This is where treatment falls down.
We have so many clients who come in and say, I'm this, this, and this, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
And then they refuse to do anything about it because they don't understand it. It makes it hard to give them a treatment plan or to help them when they're not understanding what it is you're trying to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. And being able to, speak it in the language that they understand, if that, even if that's English and English is their first language. What does that mean? Okay, so then can you guide them through the process of detox, recovery, relapse, recovery, and tell them what the pitfalls are up front? Not giving you permission to relapse. Just saying, if you don't pay attention, and if you can't endure your feelings, positive or negative, you're more prone to relapse. You've got to make this more conscious and endure what you're going through. Withdrawal is supposed to hurt.
I have a client who actually just came in 2 days ago. She graduated. She's been gone for 3 months. And I walked in and I saw her. And one of the first things I told her was, I'm not happy to see you. And she goes, you're the first person who was honest with me. And she said it made her feel like crap that everyone was saying that they were happy to see her because it meant that she did something bad. And so, I don't know why the relapse recovery, it's not a good thing to see a client once again.
But it is predictable.
Yeah, I expected it from this client, honestly. I
Yeah.
did. And I knew it was coming. I just didn't think it was going to be as soon as it was.
We know this from tobacco, okay? So I'm not certain, well, I am certain, I understand why this happens, okay? We understand from tobacco that very few people quit cold turkey and stay quit. Successful long-term quits with tobacco are based on multiple failures. But the reason we allow addicts to smoke is that it'll take 20 years for the tobacco to kill them, unless they eat a pack. Not a good death. I'm not suggesting you do that out there in TV land. But the idea in terms of relapse, look, if your drug use has eroded the brakes, we're not giving you permission, but we're not going to be surprised. A successful quit is based on multiple failures. But with some drugs, the multiple failure could kill you.
That's why we upped our amount of how many times a woman can come through our program.
To what?
We've had people come as high as 8 times. After
Okay.
that, we tell them we have nothing left to offer.
Yeah.
Usually it's about 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So you turn people away?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah, happens.
What?
Sure.
You've been through the program 8 times. We've given you
Maybe it just
everything
took
that
one
we
more
have.
time though, I don't understand.
Well,
Is it because it's paid for through insurance? Is that?
No, it's not even
Is
that.
it just
it's not
giving
even
up?
that.
Go ahead.
I don't get it.
It's not just giving up, and it's not an insurance thing. It's more of we've given you the tools and the options and everything that we have to offer you. If you haven't really got it by then, we're afraid that you're not gonna get it at all.
Exactly.
And
It's
so
tough
we
love.
rather give the bed and the space and the opportunity
So
to
what
someone
if,
who's
what if somebody
willing to
goes
do it.
out in another 6 months, they're like, hey, I got it. I got it. And they come to you and they say, I got it. Please help. You know, are you gonna say no?
It really depends on the situation and the
Case by
circumstance.
case basis.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
sometimes, you know, we have taken people on many times. The most we've ever taken anyone up to is 8 different times. But usually it only takes 2 or 3 times, and then they're pretty good. But
Sorry.
some people don't pick it up as quick as others. Some pick it up, and some
That's
just
scary.
aren't willing to
That's
do
really
it.
scary.
Well, the challenge is, again, if you have limited resources, how many times are you going to extend help to people? Now, there's another thing, this is why I wanted to I'm glad we're talking about this. And that's why I was alluding to how do you increase the intensity? Because yes, you can give people tools, but they actually have to use the tools. And they actually have to use the tools in an environment that supports the use of the tools, which out there, outside of treatment, might not be the case.
We can't hold their hand every step of the way.
So
the
you're
rest of
talking
their
about
life.
inpatient, is that?
I'm talking about inpatient,
Yeah,
and I'm
you-
talking about IOP in
Yeah.
terms of outpatient. I'm talking about any client that walks through our doors.
Wow.
We
I didn't
can
know
only
that.
be with them for so long, and then we have to let go of the reins and let them do it on their own.
Is there
Yeah.
another program out there after that?
Well, there are in other places. But we're talking about here, Willamette Family, right? Basically, yeah, so. But what they're doing is typical of the industry. And actually, you know, they have, you know, as, I'm glad to hear you say in terms of raising the limit, because, you know, it used to be 2 or 3. Sierra. Oh, not Sierra, sorry.
Could they just go to another place?
They could, but, you know, the previous treatment failure might be held against them, you know, depending if they're working off of the same model.
Is this a treatment place where they have to because of courts, or they go there by themselves? 'cause they
Some
want to?
are, some aren't.
It all depends. Some,
CPS,
yeah,
they didn't.
some are federal cases, some are, you know, on their own, some are DHS cases. Every woman comes in with a different situation.
Yeah.
And we allow children, and that's a huge thing, so.
Yeah. You know, with, for example, Judge Aiken's drug court. You know, we have actually clients, you know, attending here, college, from there, who've gone through Willamette Family on the women's side and on the men's side.
I work with women all the time, every month. It seems like I'm filling out FAFSA forms for our women once they graduate to start school here, actually, because they believe that is a good step. It's something that they can hold on to, keep them from getting bored, better further their, you know, recovery. And so I think it's a good idea. I like it.
Yeah, it's stabilizing, but it can be more intense.
Yeah, and we actually have some girls who come back and say, it was just too much for me to go to school.
All right, moving on. I guess basically, LSD technically isn't addictive in terms of the withdrawal process, but if you have people that do multiple episodes, multiple sessions, you know, especially like, you know, my friend from high school who did 100 and, let's see, 90 to 120 days. One of your research paper talked about somebody that was induced, was actually forced to take 174 consecutive days on LSD as part of the intelligence community testing, if memory serves. Anyway, one of the things you want to look for with LSD and other psychedelics is check for psychological and emotional trauma. Because some of the problem will be not the toxicity of the drug, but rewriting their reality software. And that's part of the danger. Yeah.
I know some people that have said that they've taken like 20
20 hits of acid or like 100 hits of acid, like, how can you do that? Like, how can you just like I know like the average person would take like 2 to 3 to have like a normal trip, but like 100 hits
Yes.
is like,
When did you
Yes.
guys
insane.
Okay.
I know, like, how do you
Alright.
handle that?
Here's a teachable moment. So, amazing dope tales. Remember this term LD50? Okay? Lethal dose for 50% of whatever you tested it on. Right? Or, in the case of, does it kill you? What is the dose that kills you? Right? So, the working dose of acid, the threshold, as Dr. Hoffman discovered, is somewhere around 25 micrograms. That's millionths of a gram. Okay? Now, back in the day, we basically did 150 micrograms to 300. Basically, if Owsley or Owsley's couple minions, right? The 300 mics is what we call the C-God dose. But your average street dose, especially paper acid, seems to be testing out at around 60 mics. So that's in a sheet, for example. Then your 4-way window panes, your barrel acid, and all that will be higher. So you're still talking about millionths of a gram. Now, they calculated an LD50 for LSD. It was 1 gram. Which, if you basically take the 150 mics, is something like 5,000 human doses. Now, they calculated that. I mean, they didn't have, so a sheet, while a whopping dose, I mean, I had a friend who basically got busted by the LA County sheriffs and had to eat 50 hits of acid, of orange sunshine, the old orange sunshine.
And so like,
And I said, so what happened? Well, he said, oh, you stopped coming on after the first 15.
Did he go to jail?
Yeah, and he was tripping in jail. Yeah, and, right. LA County Sheriff's busted on Sunset in LA, and he had to eat, 50 hits of orange sunshine. And, you stopped coming on after the first 15. Sure,
how
all
can
right.
you really tell like the first 15?
Hey, look, I don't know. That's just what he said. I'm just giving you because, the danger with LSD isn't necessarily the toxicity of the drug, because the toxicity, basically they fed 3 grams to an elephant. So about 15,000 human doses. The elephant died in an hour and a half of a heart attack.
Where was that in? What country?
It's in the University of Oklahoma.
Yeah, it was here.
Yeah, it's here in the States. And they basically gave the elephant a dose based on its body weight instead of its brain size.
Yep.
Okay? So essentially what's happening is basically like Gila monster venom. Certain lizards basically inject you with serotonin.
Like biting you.
Like biting you, right? And basically, so the sound of your breathing paralyzes you.
Oh, that would suck.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they kill rabbits and stuff like that. Like, your breathing kills you. Right? Because it's turning up the volume on it, right? So, they calculated from the elephant, 3 grams killing an elephant, and said, okay, a lethal dose for a human is 1 gram, which is about 5,000 doses. So, really, are you going to eat 500 sheets, a ream of paper? No, but you can certainly get that in a quantity of liquid.
Yeah.
If you ingested that all at once, which means you have to be at the top of the cut or the food chain or, know the acid cook to have access to that.
Yeah.
But, you know, there is also a problem with, you know, if you're a baby and, you know, because I've heard of, you know, people losing infants who accidentally touched a pan of LSD and the baby died based on that kind of toxicity, because less body mass for the baby, because remember, all our LD50s, all our drug effectiveness is based on adult doses. Okay, kilograms to dose.
I thought Hoffman had like a whole gram his first like trip.
Yeah, he got it on his fingertips, right?
Yeah,
so
it
it
was-
was hard, you know, so, and also when he ingested, he was working, you know, off of milligrams, which is like, wait, you didn't know that the dosage was in micrograms, you had to find, you know, that's why the whole bicycle ride thing was
So
a
epic.
trip for him. All right, so the idea, the toxicity with acid is not the physical drug, though it's possible depending on how you get access to it. It's the damage that you might have to having your reality software rewritten, partially erased or whatever. Not necessarily because of damage. So you want to check for psychological or emotional trauma. So the client learns what's possible to talk about from what you mention in the assessment and diagnosis. Okay, you teach them from what you gloss over or don't mention. Okay, so go there. You afraid to go there? Then that's a place of truth that you should go to, right? Generic assessments assume whiteness. In other words, race is not an issue, or social class is not an issue, or gender is not an issue, or unless it specifically mentions it, unless you specifically mention it, they'll gloss it over. So go there. Okay, so even if they do identify as white, do they identify with the other social norms like middle class, high school, college education? They're consumers in the legal economy, certain degrees of scientific literacy, all these things that are assumed by our field. You know, and you know, as it was pointed out, the client may get this label, but do they know what that means? I mean, do they read DSM? Do they even read the patient inserts of the drugs they're given? Or have somebody explain that? Generally, the pharmacists don't, though the pharmacists know. So we're often in that position of doing that. Okay? Also doesn't mean social class, so you can infer class from education, occupation, and the income based on their job. Okay, so a generic normal might not necessarily be optimal in terms of how you're treating them. You and the clients together might have to redefine and self-define what the normal that they're going to be shooting for in treatment, through the treatment process, is. They've been using for years, conceiving of a drug-free lifestyle be difficult. Even after 8 times, even with all the tools. Okay, so normal would have to be non-addictive, emotionally aware, and emotionally expressive. That would be a healthier norm. So, what is your understanding of gender, gender expression, sexual orientation, etc.? Don't have to out yourself, I'm not saying. I'm asking you what your understanding of it is.
But there's massive gender inequality, and I believe in our culture.
Mm-hmm. There
Mainly
is.
due to media
Mm-hmm.
messages.
Not just media, but other things too. This is not something you get in the plumbing lecture.
And you don't just look at it and see what they are. You
Right.
just can't look and see that, oh yeah, that's a man.
Because it might not be.
Right.
Might be a trans, might be lots of things, right? So our understanding within the treatment, so DSM, the old DSM-4R does make reference to gender identity dysphoria, GID, and there is talk about DSD, disorders of sex development. Some handy references. Okay, so you might have to do some lobbying with your agency for inclusion for certain things that you shouldn't have to, because inclusion of diversity is defined as part of the Oregon administrative rules that treatment is supposed to follow. Similarly, issues of race, which else DSM doesn't deal with at all, but also is covered in the OARs too. So remember, in your assessment and diagnosis, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, therefore it won't be referenced in treatment. Okay, some agencies do actually separate who does intake from who does face-to-face treatment. I've done both. Generally it doesn't happen that way, but sometimes it does. Alright, so I wouldn't necessarily be the person's primary counselor if I did the intake, but it has happened. Depends on the agency. Okay? Say?
I said we don't.
So as at assessment, you should be aware of and make the client aware of what's ahead and be preparing them for it. So after assessment, you may become aware of, or the client may reveal, other core emotional issues they've been self-medicating, which also could be a whole piece in terms of looking at relapse as well. So I've had female clients that didn't reveal their sexual abuse history, even going through Willamette family, which would theoretically be a place that, okay, with women who've been abused, who are A&D competent, wait, you didn't talk about your dad diddling you? Really? Wow. And you're revealing that to me at Lane Community College. Okay, thank you, but this is where your relapses are coming from. And that was only going one time through Willamette family. Like, so she didn't even use her 3 strikes. Well, it was then 3 strikes. Okay, so people might not necessarily reveal all their issues, right? Yeah, you can't do intake while they're loaded, right? But you can do it while they are at a stage of readiness for treatment. Okay, you're preparing them to be successful, so be real with them. Be honest, even if everybody else is not. Okay, don't minimize the danger, but do emphasize their strengths. Let them know about predictable pitfalls that are ahead. Because they are there. So the pitfalls are also in themselves and also in society that they're returning to, or will return to eventually. The smarter they are, the more they could be their own worst enemy. Charlie, Philip, host of others. Intellectuals are often more disconnected from their feelings and will use anger displays and grandiosity to distract you. Grandiosity, bigger than life. In society, there are common practices and structures produce addicts while preventing effective treatment or any treatment from getting to people. So military, prison industrial complex, the entertainment industry, culinary industry.
How is the culinary industry?
Culinary industry is a lot like rock and roll. High stress, high production, high substance abuse.
Cocaine.
Yeah, cocaine, but other things. I mean, my daughter went through culinary school in Portland, not to single out Portland, but she basically talked about, she had to replace, before she got hip, in a locked locker, she had books, textbooks, and knives stolen to finance other students' crack habits.
What?
Yeah. Like, yeah, they're, up all day studying, all night studying, or partying, and, yeah. Rampant alcoholism. I mean, have you seen Bar Rescue? I mean, how many bar owners are alcoholics? You don't have to be. How many people don't have their act together in terms of restaurant? But how, in a high-stress environment, how are you going to relieve stress? You're not going to be doing yoga. Well, they're not, right? So there's certain industries, like, I came out of the LA music industry, so, fortunately I left LA before crack hit, but, there were the positions and the jobs that I worked in, basically, you're holding together for the rock stars who are loaded. And as a roadie, you can't be loaded. So you're essentially, being a codependent with these folks. I mean, that's why, the labels after, all the major, overdose deaths and stuff like that actually started hiring drug counselors to send out on people on tour to keep them clean and sober.
That'd be awesome.
Could be.
No. Like,
But-
could be on the road.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to be more or less single or something like that. It's not a lifestyle that supports healthy families and healthy kids. But, right? So, yeah, there are certain environments that, cater to substance abuse. No pun intended with culinary. It's a reality. So the prison industrial complex, that's what SPIC means, needs active addicts, military, entertainment, tolerates addicts and alcoholics as long as you do your job. Or don't become a PR problem.
CPSY sample.
Prison industrial complex. To fill it. But also to work in it. Who says prison guards are clean and sober? Who says prison guards aren't supplying prisoners?
There was that
Oh, did I say that out loud?
That
I'm
guy
sorry.
just got in trouble because he was bringing them in wrapped in Taco Bell wrappers.
Ah.
Like favorite tacos.
Okay.
He's a corrections officer.
Uh-huh. Yes. Look,
Let's get some crack
we're talking in general terms, but I'm talking about real events, in jurisdictions within 500 miles of here, and I'm being specifically vague. Because it is dangerous to actually name this. But there are drugs in prison. Okay, I have had clients as well as practitioners working in this field within 500 miles of this location who, they sent a client into jail over the weekend and he came out dirtier than he went in. So how did that happen? So that you don't work there no more. But in either case, greater trauma needs to be met with greater skills of introspection and action for change, right? Because if the prison industrial complex, the military, entertainment, and culinary, tolerates addicts and alcoholics, active addicts and alcoholics, as long as you perform, pretty much until you stop performing, they're not going to see it as a problem as long as you handle your business, right? That's not necessarily going to be healthy. So the reason I'm bringing up these type 2 isms, the microaggressions, which even though this construct came out of looking at race, basically the other characteristics that are systems of discrimination also have microaggressions. So these are brief, commonplace, daily, verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults to the target person or group. They're not limited to human encounters, but also may be environmental in nature, such as when, for example, a person of color is exposed to an office setting that unintentionally assails their racial identity. Now, this can also be your sexual orientation. This can also be your social class. It can also be your gender. Okay, when we're talking about intersectionality, all those different systems of discrimination interact. Micro-assaults, micro-insults, micro-invalidation are all different specific types of microaggressions. One of the skills that we are trying to instill, given that discrimination happens in society and in treatment, without knowing it or without being aware of it, your words and actions could be causing a discriminatory atmosphere in the client. Or they may take it, quote unquote, not the way you intended, but the wrong way. It might not necessarily be the wrong way, but you might not necessarily have thought about it. Case in point. You've heard me talk about the constructs of intersectionality and the intersext. Yes? No? Okay. So there, this is about a decade ago, but it resulted in a formal complaint against me because I have certain feelings about, rabidly in support of GLBT folks. So when I'm going to talk about a stereotypical person, Springfield logger type who, fundamentalist Christian, who's training to be a drug counselor, saying sexual orientation is all in their head. And I go, yeah, right, it's all in their head. Okay, so you hear the sarcasm in my voice, right? So then the unintended consequence was a native, two-spirited woman heard me say that and heard me say the words, it's all in their head, and then stopped hearing me after that when I go into the whole explanation about two-spirited people and the intersex and the APA decision of 1973 and the World Health Organization of 1987 that said that there is human sexual diversity and that homosexuality is not a mental illness but a scientifically based human diversity. She didn't hear any of that. She just heard, oh yeah, it's all in the head, like I'm agreeing with him. Right? So I didn't intend that, but that was the impact.
So she complained against?
Oh, she dropped out. This is like fall term. She didn't come back. Winter, spring. Next time I heard, there was a formal complaint lodged against me in fall. And yeah, it was a while.
She stewed on that one a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was intimidating to her or something. I can't see why that is, but I could be intimidating to some folks, sure. All right? So, I basically, repeated the lecture, showed her, look, here's where it is. Here's where I'm at. Sorry you didn't hear the sarcasm, but it was sarcasm. I didn't mean that. I apologize. All right, so conscientious zone is learning to perceive social, political, and economic contradictions and to take action against oppressive elements of reality. This is part of the assessment process, so it requires conscientious zone. We don't even have a word for it in English, but in Portuguese it requires that you know what a healthy functioning condition is, either by practicing it yourself or seeing enough of the condition to want to emulate it, and that's what we're trying to do with clients. Because they might not know what a healthy normal is. Yeah.
Can you go back to the definition?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wikipedia basically says conscientiousization, which is trying to anglicize it, but, you know, conscientiousizão, it's Portuguese. So you can see from the definition, this is conscientious doesn't even come close to touching what this is. This is a skill to impart in treatment. This works with skinheads. It works with Indian lesbians. You have to be able to see their place in society and create a more optimal place in society. And society doesn't necessarily make this easy for them.
So it's basically just like having an open mind of their, like.
Well, it isn't just an open mind. See, it's now part of our, the reason I'm even talking about this, because it is, when you take, you know, the test for your CADC and then basically get retested for ethics, part of the ethics is political lobbying, not, you know, lobbying your congressman, but advocating for clients who are being discriminated against. You're supposed to advocate for them. And part of treatment is teaching them to advocate for themselves, not only within treatment, but also in the world. Okay? Willamette family didn't exist 50 years ago. The concept of women's treatment, oh, well, why would women need treatment? Why would women need treatment with their kids? Oh, should we provide an education with the kids or support them going to school while the women are in treatment? That didn't occur to the addictions industry 50 years ago. I'm just saying, that's a civil rights issue. Right? I mean, it's a no-brainer now, but it wasn't then. It had to be fought for. I mean, it seems like, right, it's just like, you don't have to argue with medical professionals about washing your hands. You know, making sure the instruments are clean and wearing gloves. You don't have to argue about that. But 150 years ago, they didn't even believe in germs. So I'm just saying, in terms of conscientiousness, there's other issues that impact people in treatment. All right, so what is that healthy condition? What does it look like? It's also about what a healthy functioning society would be if you were actually in it. Like, for example, you know, if somebody fails at Willamette Family 8 times, let's move them to some place where it's more intense.
There you go.
But what would that look like? Well, I mean, I have an idea, but again, what would that look like? Okay, so the practice of freedom, and remember in my framework, addiction is slavery, so how do slaves free themselves? The practice of freedom comes from taking actions against oppressive elements of reality, and that's part of your recovery. That's the whole central tenet of the well-briety movement. Our addiction's coming from losing our Indian way of life. We have to get it back. But then again, what does the well-briety movement look like for white people? What is a healthy, non-addictive, non-sexist, non-racist, non-classist mainstream culture look like? For recovery friendly. 12-step or not. What does that look like? It might be hard to conceive of that, but conscientiousness is part of the skill that we teach, we could teach. Right? So you create that world internally regardless of what's going on around you. And again, that's a skill that we're trying to teach in part of the tools that we're teaching in treatment. Yes, you're going out into an addictive environment. Yeah, stay away from shaky persons, places, or things. But sometimes you're living with people that are still caught in their disease. How are you going to live with them without relapsing? Because moving might not always be an option. All right, so what Rasmussen calls problems related to the social environment. This could mean also one's social group or one's relationship to society. And your group's relationship to society. Hence, since she didn't have this word, I'm borrowing it from Paulo Freire. Okay, so you might not be able to change your environment, but you can change your response to it. So health sometimes means staying safe, sane, and sober in the country of the abusive crackhead. Okay, and so what does this look like emotionally? What does your internal sanctuary look and feel like? So you can create one as an exercise within treatment. Okay, don't get down on yourself for not doing the right things. Guilt and depression can be like drugs too. Do them more and that's all you'll do. More guilt, more depression. Made a mistake, I'm learning from it. Don't make the mistake again. Perfect practice makes perfect. It's not practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. The Buddha died because the person whose house he was staying at gave him her last bit of meat, and the meat was tainted because they didn't have refrigerators back then. And he didn't refuse because it was her last bit of meat and she was feeding the Buddha, and he got sick and it killed him. His dying words, do your best. Pay attention to what has heart and meaning. Not his words, but good words anyway. What emotions are you feeling? Try and identify and work with them and work through them. Okay, so in treatment, we're trying to have their emotional life come alive. We did this already. Oh, right. But it bears repeating, so I will for a second. Okay, so a constellation of symptoms, whether it's PTSD, PSSD, post-slavery stress disorder, multi-generational trauma, ADHD, learning disabilities, poverty, domestic violence or self-injury, addictions, and isms. So to counter the symptoms and to recognize the symptoms is part of conscientious zone. Constellation of signs towards healing. If there is PTSD or trauma, what is the wound? How is it healed? And then heal it. ADHD doesn't mean that you have an attention deficit. It might mean, though, that you are not skilled in slowing down and paying attention to what has heart and meaning. Learning disability. Okay, it's not so much a learning disability, but you could pay attention to what do you feel. An emotional intelligence. A response to poverty is inner wealth, a different sort of economy. Inner wealth or wisdom. DV and SI, how are you safe? How are you healing? In A and D, we talk about harm reduction, abstinence, and recovery. Recovery isn't just abstinence. And then skill building with systemic discrimination, if you're subject to the various isms. So here's, let's say that this is the actual relationship of those stars in that constellation to Earth. So Earth is here, over here on the extreme left. So let's say Earth is where they live optimally, but they're not there yet. And their symptoms are separating them from Earth. So if you notice that, of course, you understand that constellations in the sky are not flat pictures. The stars have relationships to each other as well as to Earth. So the idea, Earth is their optimal being, where they live already but must return to by escaping the pull of the symptoms in the constellation, whichever ones are most salient to them. Okay, have them practice what's closest to optimal. It's part of the treatment process, based on what's pulling them. Okay, give them the fuel, tools for thought, the accelerated way to freedom, even in secret. Making reference to the old slave spiritual steal away to Jesus, or whatever their optimal role model state of being is. Because that's often a key within recovery is, who's your role model? Who are you emulating? Jesus means in Greek healing Zeus. Actual name Yeshua means the supreme being, Yah, saves and restores. Shua. Yah also means one who sees. The way to salvation, healing, and restoration. So just like I talked about in the previous slide, they may have these symptoms based on their relationship to those different things that are parts of the life. ADHD, poverty, learning disabilities, addiction, systemic discrimination. All of these can be pulling on them and can be healed according to what is most important or easiest to address for them. Okay, so pay attention. Find and heal the wound. Worry about who wounded you later. Just don't make the wounds worse. So Yahshua, sacred unity saves and restores. The anointed one, consciously producing spiritual strength so that through your atmosphere the sick are healed, the hungry fed, raise the spiritually dead, the soulless ones, the zombies, to keep other people from stoning other people. Foreman, thank you. All right, grades, just so you know, final goes out a week from Thursday. Total possible points at this point, 220. 20 points of extra credit built into the midterm, so doing nothing more with everything gets you a C. Assuming you've done everything to this point. But you're not just satisfactory people. You're a people. Right?
Well,
Supposed
yeah.
to nod yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay. All right. So once they're detoxed, inpatient or outpatient, they're confronted with this total stranger that they probably haven't met yet, with all the things that have happened to them. So it's not what's wrong with you; it's what happened to you. You might not be mentally ill. You may just be alone with your thoughts, undistracted for the first time in a long time. This is a new experience for people. Will they even like that person that they are? They don't know that yet.
Maybe expecting somebody else too.
Yeah. So the practitioner has to be aware of what themselves while this process is going on. We might not have talked about limbic resonance, but limbic resonance is where you can feel their emotions and they can feel yours. So they can pick up on your calm as long as you are calm. They catch healing from you. So the assignments that you were given for your self-care, so you can pass it on. So the recons, personal addiction inventory, food, mood, etc. And mind-body disciplines. Can't pass on healing that you don't have yourself. And part of self-care is looking at the relationship between mind, mood, and your immune response. Your mood is up, your immune system is up, you can resist colds. Mood is down, the immune system goes down, the efficiency. All right, let's leave it at that for today. See you Thursday. Here are your papers, last name by Alpha. Roll credits.
Lane Online. Learn, unlearn, relearn.